Hey, it's Mike from the Run Testers. So we noticed we had a few comments asking us about the Garmin Venu SQ, which is here. Now, it wasn't the next video we were going to do, but we thought, we'll give the people what they want. So the good news is that myself and Nick have both been using the Venu SQ. We've run with it plenty. So we thought we'd pull together our video, let you know our running thoughts on it. How we got on, how it compares to the other Venu and the other Garmin watches, and whether you should buy it. So yeah, here is our take on the Garmin Venu SQ.
So design-wise, I'm not a huge fan of the Venu Square, I have to say. Don't mind a square watch, obviously I like the Apple Watch. It's the screen really, I don't think the screen's that great. And obviously you're losing battery life, you're losing an always-on feature, it's not very bright outside. And I don't think it's really that much nicer than something you get on like the 445, the kind of normal Garmin trans-selective screen. The two-button design is also pretty confusing when you first get it. It took a while, to kind of get there and stop messing things up. Touchscreen's reasonably responsive to touches, but it's not brilliant on race to wake, I found. So during a run or even during general life, it's just when you turn, there's a beat before the screen wakes up. That's a little bit annoying. I find about the Apple Watch, it's instant. Fitbit also takes a second or two, and every single time it's a very, very minor annoyance, but that adds up over time. So yeah, the original Venu I think was quite a nice design. The kind of round, that kind of slightly better AMOLED screen that it has compared to this. So yeah, not wowed by the design. At its price, it's kind of okay, but even then, I think there are proper running watches that actually look just as nice, if not nicer. So yeah, not hugely impressed. And certainly something like the Fitbits that are around there, like the Versa 2 and the Sense for 300, Versa 3 now actually, are nicer looking than this, in my opinion.
So in terms of design, I feel very similar to how Nick feels about it, in the sense that it just doesn't feel as exciting and as nice to look at as the original Venu. And actually, if you look at other watches around this price range, like the Fitbit Versa 3, even the Apple Watch Series 3, like the cheapest Apple Watch, I think you're getting a nicer looking watch there. The screen, I don't have a massive issue with the screen, but what I did have an issue with is that the fact that it's not the same screen technology that you're getting on the round Venu, which it's a shame because it's really good quality, and I really liked having that colour display. And while I didn't have any real issues personally with the visibility, running at night and running in bright light, you just know you're getting something better on Garmin's other Venu, and I think that's an issue for me. In terms of navigation outside of the touchscreen, so you've got two physical buttons. Now, absolutely fine in terms of using those buttons, but it's the navigation, the UI behind it that is quite frustrating to use. Now, Garmin uses a different kind of setup to what they use on their Forerunner watches and Vivo Active watches. So there's a little bit getting used to where everything lives, and I found, and I think Nick found as well, is that you could end up pressing buttons that open you up into screens that you don't actually want to be in. And even when you're out running and you can just kind of forget, and if you're kind of ingrained in that Garmin kind of ecosystem, it can be quite frustrating to use. So I think design, hardware wise, not massively exciting. I think you can get nicer looking watches, and in terms of software, I describe it as archaic, and I think Garmin need to get more of the Forerunner experience into their Venu watches, especially the SQ, going forward if they're going to make more of these watches. Okay, so if you're looking at the Venu SQ, you're probably wondering how it compares to the Garmin Venu, which launched last year, and that was Garmin's first watch with a colour touchscreen display. First obvious thing, one's round, one's square. That's the kind of most obvious difference. When you kind of dig a bit more down into it, the other kind of big things that you might be interested to know about is the fact that the screen technologies are different. So on the Venu, you have an AMOLED display, and on the Venu SQ, you've got a liquid color display. Now, what does that mean? Essentially, AMOLED is the kind of display technology you see kind of in high-end smartwatches, so stuff from like Samsung, Fitbit, and then a liquid colors display is a kind of lower quality display. Essentially, you're still getting a color display. They're both always on options for both. Ultimately, you're not getting a higher quality, a higher performance in terms of colours and brightness and vibrancy and things like that you're going to get on the Venu. Other things to note is features like the altimeter. Now, the altimeter is something used to measure elevation. Now, you only get that on the round Venu. You don't get that on the Venu SQ. When you dig into some of the other features that you have access to, the round Venu has animated workouts, whereas the Venu SQ doesn't have that. So what that feature is, essentially you can kind of download workouts, so there's preloaded workouts that you can follow on the watch with kind of animations essentially. So those are the kind of the main things. Ultimately everything else in terms of what you can do in terms of tracking running is identical, but those are the key things that you might think, well, actually I want the Venu SQ, and it might sway you, it might not, but those are the key differences between the Venu and the Venu SQ.
So running wise, the Venu Square is a bit of a mixed bag. Obviously, as a Garmin, it does have a better native sports tracking kind of performance than you get from most smartwatches. Certainly better than Fitbit's native tracking, better than Apple's native tracking, although there are some good third-party apps on the Apple Watch. So that's a big plus point. You're getting good stats, you're getting things like lap pace. All the key stats are there, structured workouts are there. Your core running experience is kind of as good as kind of cheap Garmin dedicated running watches in terms of, you know, on paper what's actually there. Practice, there are a few problems I had with it. Accuracy wise, I wasn't wowed. The heart rate was sometimes just the kind of standard heart rate monitor problems, which is it would lag behind spikes on like intervals or strides. And on one run, it was just completely wrong. It was too high the whole time. I think there was another one where it, you know, the first 5 minutes it was all over the place before it finally got an accurate lock onto my heart rate. So nothing too amazing there. About, you know, slightly below par, or even for most optical heart rate monitors, which are still never that amazing. GPS was also, I'm not sure about it. I think it was a little bit generous quite a few times. I run like a 2.5k loop for kind of 10k steady runs kind of once a week, and it's around 2.5k. Watches kind of read it differently, but mostly they're around that mark. But the Venu was very generous on that loop. It was kind of reading it long every time. It actually started to get longer each time I went around it, which is, you know, not a good sign for exactly the same loop. A couple of runs it was closer to the Phoenix I was wearing on the other wrist, but wasn't entirely convinced by GPS, but it's probably okay, broadly okay, but it certainly seemed a little generous to me at times. So maybe if you're suddenly clocking massive PBs with this watch when you get it, maybe just check if you're actually not running a little bit shorter than it says. I also do have a problem with the screen when I'm running. You can set it to be always on, but it's not really always on. It is always on, but it's not bright enough to read kind of without turning and waking the screen. Like stats are there, you know they're there, but you can't really see with any precision what it's showing until you actually wake the screen properly, for me. And it's only 3 stats per data page as well, so it's, you know, it's not really a Garmin experience on the par of something like the Forerunner 45 even, which is cheaper. It's certainly meant to be a more kind of a crossover watch, but the running performance was just okay, and it certainly isn't something anything to write home about, basically.
Okay, so in terms of running performance for me, I would say it was a bit mixed. The first thing I would say is the GPS was a little bit sluggish for me in terms of picking up a signal, so it had me hanging around longer than I'd like to be. In terms of the actual running with this watch and that side of things, it's a comfortable watch to run with. I would say like Nick, the race to wake responsiveness is not great. I think you get something better on something like the Apple Watch, or even something like the Huawei or Fitbit watches. In terms of the actual data, it was never 100% accurate. It was generally fine. I mean, it was things like pace and distance and things like that was generally fine for me. With heart rate, again, fine for steady runs, like a lot of Garmin watches. And when you kind of hit up with the high intensity running, it starts to falter a little bit. It's definitely not the worst I've used, but it's still an occasion where I would say pair up a chest strap monitor if you're kind of relying on that heart rate data, and you can do that on the Venu SQ as well, which is good. So generally, running performance okay, not amazing. I think you probably get a more solid, reliable running performance of something like the 45. Maybe even the Apple Watch Series 3 as well. But tracking fine, just a few little issues for me essentially. So in terms of battery life, now Garmin's talking about kind of up to 6 days, kind of in general smartwatch modes. When you factor in GPS tracking, that's kind of 14 hours. So what that means is you're actually getting an extra day more than the first Venu, and probably roughly around the same in terms of GPS battery life. Now obviously it's got a lower kind of resolution, a lower quality display to power, so that obviously has an impact on giving you maybe a little bit extra battery. I found generally it was that kind of 5 to 6 days. Now if you have the always on display, that will always reduce battery life, and you'll kind of be told that and kind of give you a heads up. Now that probably drops it down to maybe 3-4 days, depending on how you use it. Also with music, now if you've got music, and we've kind of said this with other Garmin's before, if you're streaming music, you're probably when you're running, you've got your heart rate, and you're using GPS, that is going to have more of an impact on your battery life, so that's something to keep mind of. And you can see a kind of a bigger drop off in battery. It's not worryingly bad in terms of drop off, but it means it will reduce the amount of running and run tracking you could do on a weekly basis. So battery life, if you kind of look at what it kind of compares to in terms of those price points at the non music Venu SQ, pretty good. If you go up and jump up with the music, essentially you're getting similar to what you probably get in that price range from other Garmin's. Obviously more than the Apple Watch, probably the same as what you're getting on a Fitbit Versa. So battery life in general for me, okay, kind of what it kind of stated, it kind of matched that, and yeah, week-long battery life, definitely less when you've got the always on display and you're using music streaming as well.
So the verdict on the Venu Square, it's a bit of an odd watch. Basically, I think the key selling point for this is, it's a slightly nicer screen than other Garmin's with music. It's the cheapest music watch in Garmin's lineup, on RRP, although you can really get the Vivo Active 3 for around the same price with music, or even less. And the Vivo Active 4 isn't that much far ahead of it in terms of the the kind of £220 the Venu Square with music costs. And those are nice looking watches. They're nicer watches. They don't have the same screen as this. They've still got kind of Garmin standard screen, but I don't think the screen is actually a big upgrade on that, if an upgrade at all. Like the colours are slightly richer on certain screens, especially like the home screen. But during workouts, it's certainly no better. Garmin doesn't use that screen for an awful lot, to be honest. You're not getting a load of brightly covered graphs or anything that really takes advantage of it. So yeah, I mean the AMOLED screen on the full priced Venu is nice. It's genuinely a little bit nicer than something like the Vivo Actives. Whether it's actually worth the step up is still another question, but I don't think this screen is actually that fantastic. And the 2-button design is a bit weird. It takes some getting used to. It's not perfect on that front either. So yeah, it's a Garmin with good native sports tracking, though some slight issues on the run for me. With music, if you get the music version, which I think is definitely the better of these two watches. The version without music, I think there's no reason to get that ahead of the 4 and the 45 for me. It's not that much better looking. It's more expensive. It's a worse running experience. It's a worse all-round experience, I'd say. Obviously, having music is a massive factor. I would definitely personally be tempted to try and find the Vivo Active 3 music or the Vivo Active 4 at a kind of a similar price if you possibly can. I think they're nicer watches. They're more enjoyable to use. And they don't have kind of the similar issues that I had with the Venu in terms of accuracy wise on GPS. So yeah, it's an interesting watch. It's a cheap Garmin with music. It's quite a nice idea, but it doesn't really hit the spot for me, and I'd be looking elsewhere within Garmin's range.
Okay, so should you buy the Venu SQ? Now, this is an interesting one. I think personally, I wouldn't buy it. I think you could maybe get a better, kind of more well-rounded running experience from something like the Forerunner 45. Now, you're not going to get all the smartwatch stuff from the 45, which you'll get on the Venu SQ. And if you look at the price point for the non-music version, so it's £180 around that, $200 point. Actually, it's not a bad option if you look at it from that point of view, and you don't want music. If you look at what else you've got there, you've got the kind of Apple Watch Series 3, Fitbit Versa 3, maybe the Huawei Watch GT2e. I think some of the Amazfit stuff, like the GTS 2, are around this price point as well. And I think, having tested the sports tracking on those, I think you're probably getting something more reliable. And if you're kind of looking at the music edition, then I think it gets a little bit more interesting. I think, like Nick has said, you probably can look at some of the Vivo Active watches, even some of the older ones, maybe the 3, and actually get maybe nicer watch. You're not getting the colour display, but I don't think the displays are that bad on the those other Garmins, maybe some older Garmins as well. So yeah, that higher price point, I think, for the music edition, I think it's a bit more difficult one to kind of recommend. I think at the kind of cheaper non-music price point, I think actually it's an option. I just think you have to be willing to live with the fact that you're not getting that same display technology in the original Venu. You're going to have to kind of learn to get to grips with how the UI and where everything lives. But if you can deal with that, it's a nice enough watch. I just think personally, I didn't love running with it, in the sense that I think you kind of constantly compare it to the original Venu and what you got there, and the nicer watch, nicer technology, all the features that you want. So yeah, that's my take and Nick's take on the Garmin Venu SQ. Obviously, if you've got any other questions, anything we didn't kind of cover in the video, let us know. As always, like and subscribe. Hit the bell wherever that is to hear about find out about our new videos. And we'll see you for the next Run Testers video.